2/3 of Massachusetts is forested. Over 75% of these forests are family forests, owned by families and individuals. The average age of a family forest owner in Massachusetts is 60 years old. In the coming years, much of our woodlands will be passing hands from one generation to the next. How these woods are passed on will have a significant impact on our future forests and the benefits they provide. Here is a story of how one family, the Rileys, were able to pass land on to the next generation, protecting its natural resources, scenic beauty, and family history, while still providing for the needs of the next generation.
Okay, this property was purchased by my grandparents, Charles and Beatrice Riley, in the 1940s. It was used as a summer residence at first. My grandfather used his skills as a landscape architect to develop the beautiful landscape around the house. My grandfather passed away when my sister was 2 years old. My brother and I had not yet been born. Our earliest memories of my grandmother involved fishing, blueberry picking, canoeing, and riding in her old Army Jeep around the trails in the woods of her property. She always cultivated an appreciation of nature, especially that which lived on this property. As we grew through our teenage years, she would question us to determine if we would care for the property she loved so much when she was unable. Our answers were probably not to her satisfaction, because at that age we all had big plans which did not involve living in an old house in Barre. My grandmother continued to develop our appreciation for the environment, the property, and all the wildlife on it. I remember one night when I came to visit for the weekend, I heard the coyotes howling and yipping for the first time, and I began to think of all the wildlife out there. I still had no intention of living here, but I began to think of what would happen to this beautiful area in the future and who would care for it. I later moved in with my grandmother, and my sister also moved to the property. We cared for my grandmother as she grew older and weaker. The question of what would happen to the property became more urgent. We began to think about keeping the land as it is and possibly living here. We talked to a lawyer and a financial advisor about the cost of inheriting the property and the tax burden of maintaining it. We were fearful we would have difficulty affording it. The financial advisors referred to us to Mount Grace Land Trust. My grandmother's wish was to have the property remain intact and undeveloped. She was always wary of legal agreements, and she needed to get all the information and to trust all those involved. Lee Youngblood gave us all the information we needed and encouraged us by showing us all the benefits and options.
I'm Lee Youngblood, Executive Director of Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. Mount Grace is a regional land trust located in north central Massachusetts. I met the Rileys when they contacted Mount Grace. They were at a point where the landowner, Beatrice Riley, was getting very aged, and the grandchildren were about to become responsible for the land, and they knew that their grandmother wanted the land protected. A financial advisor gave them the name of Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust, and I got a phone call from Janet Riley.
And the division of the property was made easier by the land trust. I live in the house which my grandparents lived in. My sister built a house on the property reserved for her, and my brother built a house on the property on Everett Road. My sister has horses, gardens, and her family enjoys the pond for skating. My brother-in-law has recently begun keeping bees. My brother is enjoying living back in his hometown. He and his family enjoy the trails and the beaver pond behind their house. Mark and I enjoy gardening, berry picking, walking the trails, and watching wildlife. Mark is bringing back the orchard on the property. This is a great area for birds with fields, ponds, brooks, and forests. Other wildlife on the property are fox, porcupine, coyotes, and possibly bear. Ferns, lady slippers, mayflowers, and other beautiful plants can be found throughout the property. Besides all the wonderful wildlife that has been preserved, our memories are also intact and can be passed down through the next generation. It was my grandmother's idea to preserve the property. My sister and I did the research, and Mount Grace and Lee Youngblood provided us with a plan which would benefit all those involved.
So 10 years after working with the Rileys, the conservation restriction is still in place, and the Rileys live on their land. They sold 80 acres, they kept 200, and of that 200, about 20 acres were kept out of conservation. And so there's room for 3 houses there, and so the whole family is able to remain on the land and continue to farm it.
Planning the future of your family's land is a critical step to meeting your family's personal and financial goals. Planning your land's future can also be of great benefit to your community. Having a family conversation about the land and contacting a local land trust to find out your options are great ways to get started. To find a land trust working in your town, visit www.masswoods.net.